Media Dialogues in 2022.
Hello, welcome to Media Dialogues. On the show today, we are talking about the urgent need to protect people from online scammers by creating awareness about digital fraud. Now, digital financial transactions have grown at a mind-boggling pace in India, and that's come at the cost of greater vulnerability to a spectrum of cyber attacks. So stakeholders in the ecosystem, from the banking regulator to the government of India, to individual banks, to fintech companies, to the police and big tech platforms, everyone's pulling out all stops to ensure cyber security. Google has just launched a multimedia awareness campaign as well as a slew of other initiatives to discuss how big the challenge is, how it keeps evolving, and why all stakeholders must collaborate to counter this threat. I'm talking today to Sapna Chadha. She's the Vice President of Marketing India and Southeast Asia at Google. She's joining us from Singapore. And Sunil Mehta, Chief Executive of the IBA, or the Indian Banks Association, from Mumbai. I'm going to start by welcoming both of you. And Sunil, first question to you. Why now? Why are we seeing so much effort, and I mentioned some of it, come into place at this point of time? What makes it so urgent in September 2022?
Anuradha, you know, banking is a business of trust. And banking system has adopted technology in the last decade in a very faster pace. And as you rightly said in your opening remarks, that now the customer convenience is available for operation from their home for banking accounts, and the digital spread is going at a phenomenal speed. So when there is a new technology and there is a speed, there are inherent risks into it. Bankers are very much concerned for maintaining the integrity of the systems, because consumer confidence and trust is to be maintained. And thanks to our government and the regulator, that they have not allowed any bank to fail in past. And whenever there was some crisis, maybe on the asset quality side or other side, they found one big brother to help the smaller bank and take over that bank, so that the consumer interest is protected and depositors' interest is protected. And we have seen recent past that some of the banks were helped out by the banking system as well as by the government and the regulator, so that consumer trust in the banking system is protected. Now, if one cyber, like if somebody is duped in a phishing attack, or somebody is just invited to click a link and then they lose the money, they shout at the top of a voice and everybody listens, and they think that the adoption of a banking technology, internet banking, may be a very risky proposition for them, and that may desist from the bank from coming on the digital platforms. Digital platforms are not only offering the conveniences, it is facilitating the financial inclusion. And now I think we can be proud that we are the largest UPI transaction performing country in the world.
Yes.
And the type of, say, the response available from the last mile vendors, like street vendors, accepting payment through QR codes, and people transacting because of the mobile applications, they can transfer the funds.
Scenario has changed, so much. I mean, you just, QR codes, we're just using it with such ease these days. UPI, cardless payments. Let me get Sapna in here. Sapna, Google has launched these initiatives. The campaign, we've seen this Do Kadam Aage, Rakhe Do Kadam Aage campaign that you've launched. And I find two things interesting. So I'm going to break this question up. The first part of the question is, I can see this attempt to be collaborative and that different stakeholders coming together to communicate a similar message. Why the need for collaboration? Then I'll get to the second part.
Oh, first of all, thank you for, I think, having this important discussion. As partners in India's breakout digital trajectory, we believe it's critical that the opportunity of connectivity does not come at the price of online safety. And we don't look at this just as a checkbox. It's the foundation of which we have built our platforms and our products. And Mr. Mehta said trust is so critical. And if you talk to anybody in the ecosystem, the banks, brands, platforms, everyone understands that ultimately we can't have connectivity come at the price of online safety. And we need to build trust in the ecosystem, which means everyone works together. And I think why collaboration? Ultimately, none of us can do this alone. And I think as I've spoken to many of our partners that have come behind this campaign, It's more than a campaign. It's actually it needs to be always on. It needs to be a way that we work together and that we actually all join hands, because there's harms and there's threats that exist that, you know, are taking the world by storm, and they're taking small towns, rural areas, small businesses are being taken, you know, advantage of, and ultimately we won't be able to do this if we don't work together. So for us, collaboration was just born out of the idea that none of us can do this alone.
Why did you narrow down on phishing? Because there are so many different things that are, you know, in which people can be targeted. Why phishing? Is that because it's the most common?
I wouldn't say that. Actually, our campaign covers a number of things. Phishing is one of the areas which we've gone deep into, but our messages are really around making sure that people aren't falling prey to suspicious links, that they're also making sure that they're looking at what links that they're clicking on, right? Do you know who you're having this relationship with, right? So I wouldn't say it just touches phishing. We also have realized that we need to do our part on education, whether it's with children. So part of our campaign is focused on underrepresented groups, those that are most at risk, and educating them. We've also realized, working with developers, this is on the startup community, and developers are also grappling with how to keep their citizens and their customers safe as well. So how we can strengthen the ecosystem on cybersecurity on the whole. So phishing is definitely something that we have seen, you know, and is an area which we need to drive more awareness of. That's what drove, you know, some of our messaging around that. But I would say it's not going to be focused on just one thing.
Sunil, let me get you in here. Give me a sense of who are the most vulnerable, because, you know, Sapna alluded to the fact that there are some sections of our online population who are perhaps more vulnerable than others. Who would you say, from the bank's perspective, are more vulnerable?
I will say it's all sections of society, because sometimes the vulnerability is not driven just by awareness, it's driven by greed also.
Yes.
You get a lottery offer the way the Google Do Kadam Aage campaign. So people become so greedy that they think overnight they will get their money multiplied, or they will buy something very cheap the way the Mango ad with the Google has created. So all type of customers are vulnerable. I won't say it's the last mile who is only getting impacted. Basically, those who are well aware, those who are educated, sometimes they fall into trap because of the positive or the negative incentives built into the messages. They will say that tonight your electricity will be disconnected if you do not go to this link and pay your bill. And people are not aware whether the bill has been paid somebody in the family. So they may go to the link and give the data, and later they realize that it was a phishing attack and they have taken away the entire data and their money is gone from their accounts.
Right.
So these vulnerabilities are in each section of the society.
So it's not just senior citizens or young, you know, millennials, people who transact very frequently, or people with less, you know, on the lower end of the digital literacy spectrum. So there is no cohort like that that's particularly on the radar of these scammers.
Rather, those who are more literate are more vulnerable, because they get more tempted to opt for the newer options, cheaper things, and awareness, because their awareness is more. So their vulnerability is also more, because they want to go for a better buying deal and all that. Sure. So it's not just specific to one segment. And like last mile, they have got. They're also vulnerable, but sometimes the balances are also very low in their accounts, which do not tempt much of these scammers to approach those accounts. So what they do is they try to find out people, those who have balances in their account and are say vulnerable to these ideas, by accepting the offers of so many mangoes at a low price, or maybe a lottery, or maybe a threat of a power cut, or threat of a so they get more duped.
Right. Sapna, you know, I did read that you all have also at Google made certain grants available to some NGOs working with senior citizens, with women. Do you agree with Sunil that it's not any one particular cohort, and yet some people may need a little bit more, you know, sort of understanding or training in digital safety?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I mean, we were actually talking about this, that at our launch, where we were discussing how even people like us, you and I, perhaps we have, thought about clicking on something. I know certain groups' radars are up, but they're still susceptible, and other groups maybe might not be thinking about this, which is why we made grants, around $2 million from our Google.org to help high-risk groups. And that's the thing, they're higher risk, but everybody else is susceptible. But women, seniors, and other underrepresented groups like the LGBTQIA plus community is at risk. And I think when we think about safety, it does go beyond just financial fraud, in our opinion.
Yes.
There's numbers of cyberbullying, right? There are other issues that we need to be mindful of. And as at Google, that's why we're thinking about this more holistically. But when we look at the main issue on the ground today, as you mentioned, like we are seeing phishing is one of the largest. And that's why from a banking partnership standpoint, we said, let's work together on this one because we can all actively work on this. But the problem is much larger, and it's only going to get more complex as time goes on.
Sunil, do you think law enforcement is keeping pace with these complaints when they do come up?
So one thing I must say, and I must compliment the government, that they have really created a lot of enablers for it. One thing is, now there is a 24-hour SOC switching being operated by the banking system to prevent the phishing attacks on the system. Then there is the government has already come out with a certain is basically all the financial institutions are mandated that if there is any cyber attack, the message should be passed on to the certain so that it is analyzed, the origins can be tracked, and the culprits can be booked. Then banking system has also gone for a two-factor authentication to prevent fraud, at least simply by going to the internet. You are not able to use your password. You need a mobile confirmation also. And then encryption, like 256-bit encryption has also been done by the banking system to protect. The captcha is also used so that bot-related or the robot-related.
Yes. But Sunil, you mentioned the two-factor authentication, and I know when that was announced, like when some of those recurring online subscriptions were, stopped by the RBI, and you had to, sort of do it individually again. You have this two-factor OTP-based authentication. Give me, I know there were several people who said, oh, this is coming in the way of our convenience. Oh, this is slowing things down. Because we are also getting used to the conveniences that technology offers. Do you think that we are, sort of a little guilty of wanting things to be very, very easy and therefore opening ourselves up and making ourselves susceptible to attacks? Same question to Sapna. Let Sunil quickly come in and then I'll get to you.
So, in fact, that's a human tendency. Everybody wants convenience, but not convenience at the cost of safety. So, I think two-factor authentication, our country's vulnerability and awareness level really needs this sector, and we are way ahead of the Western countries. Like even in US, when you use your card, there is no second-factor authentication. I've been to US and I used the card and nobody asked me about an OTP. Yeah. But that way, I think our technologies like our India is now gaining a technological superiority on creating the cybersecurity framework, which is helping the people at preventing these vulnerabilities. So I can say the system is doing good and all the stakeholders are playing more, but it need to be more because culprits are always a step ahead of the regulators and the those who are trying to protect the systems.
Right. Sapna, what do you make of people's reaction to all these layers of security that the financial system tries to put into place, and then the trade-off between being safe and being convenient?
I think this is an evolving space. I think when initially some of this new language and new terminology came out and new friction points were met with resistance. But I think we see it in a response from our users. When we ask them what they care about, online safety, protection, these are now coming up more and more just in the last few years where they're asking for more. And so because awareness is going up, I think what we're seeing is there's more openness. So just as an example, the second factor authentication exists on financial services, but even at Google, we've now, because our users expect it, we've built in protection into our products. So for example, we were the first consumer technology company to offer second factor, and now we're the first to turn it on by default. So in our products like Gmail or Chrome browser, because people are transacting through Chrome and otherwise, right? So we actually have enrolled an additional 150 million accounts in 2SV, but it's reduced hijacking risk by 50%. And so there's a belief in this now that I see existing, and there's an expectation that users have for built-in protection, and they expect not just the banks, right, or not just the government. They expect companies like Google, and all brands to actually be thinking about how are you keeping these safe.
Does this become something that brands have to be companies have to be very conscious about when it comes to brand equity going forward, the security of customer data, the security of customer finances?
Absolutely, right. I think this is non-negotiable. And when I talk to my peers, whether they're food delivery companies or brands that are e-commerce across the board, ultimately, this is impacting everyone. That's why, as we came together for this effort, it goes even beyond just the banks, right? It's actually around trust and safety across the board. And any marketer will tell you today that when we're looking at what is driving our usage, a product like Google Pay, it's only because of trust that exists in a company like Google that actually drives a willingness and a usage that we actually didn't, never expected to see the kind of take up that Mr. Mehta has talked about. But because there's trust, there's willingness to work with brands that are, again, taking that extra step and making sure that it's coming across as authentic, right? This isn't just about, we want to get you through the funnel as fast as possible, please make a transaction. Actually, you'll see in many places, there's alerts that we're giving, and a lot of brands are giving. Are you making too large of a transaction? Are you sure you want to do this? And never share your details, right? Because sometimes in two-way, you don't realize, am I sending money or am I receiving money? It's really easy to do the opposite of what you were saying. So how do we make sure that we are putting that trust in place? So I think it's an imperative more than it's ever existed in the past.
Okay, hold on to that thought. We'll take a quick commercial break, but we'll be back very soon. And we're going to keep talking about how the threats that are coming in are changing and how the communication to deal with those threats has to keep evolving as they come in. Stay with us.
Media Dialogues in 2022.